Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this today. As you can see, I'm a veteran. I've done this before, and I have the T-shirt to prove it, which I'm reusing today. And I also have another disclosure that I'm working from home, and my dog does not like people coming into my building, so there may occasionally be some barking in the background. But yeah, I can't, the messages that Kinnari and Latika have already shared are, so true. And we can't forget that at the center of all of this, we do this for our patients. So I'm really pleased to be able to come and talk today. Oh, sorry, I'm just trying to share my... Okay, so I'm not going to tell you anything that you don't know. Gene therapies are transformative. And you're going to hear some more about that from the patients that you have and the families there today. But, I've been doing this for 15 or so years now. I've looked after about 100 children, and I've really seen the transformative effects that these therapies can have for patients and families. This is just a selection of some of our patients from a gene therapy trial of a disease called ADA SCID, baby and bubbles, bubble baby disease, where children aren't able to really, they don't have an immune system that will allow them to go and mix and do things. They're supported by daily and medications, weekly injections, and the only hope is a bone marrow transplant, which can be quite complicated. And we've just seen some really amazing effects of gene therapy for these patients. They're now able to go to school, live a completely normal life, not have to take any medications anymore, and it's not just transform their life, but their families as well. So what we've seen is amazing. But these effective therapies for rare diseases aren't reaching patients in need, and they're not reaching patients in need for non-medical reasons. It's not that they're unsafe or they don't work. It's for some of the reasons that Latika and Kinnari have talked about, that in the ultra-rare disease field, the commercialization of these products is difficult. So if we think about gene therapies for rare diseases, there have been over 150 clinical trials, and that has resulted in just a handful of licensed therapies for these conditions. And even then, some of those therapies are now not accessible to patients due to reimbursement issues or similar. I am, however, 100% confident that Rocket is going to make it over to the other side to have a licensed therapy that is accessible for patients in need. And this is a highly topical issue. It's something that everybody's realizing now, that gene therapy for rare diseases, we have to ensure its future. We've seen publications in the scientific literature. It was also picked up by The Economist last year as a focus of what we need to think about. So where's the block? I've told you that we've got these transformative therapies, and we've got a few patients who've benefited from these, but we're not able to translate those into therapies for the wider population. And there's actually lots of different blocks. It's not just one particular thing that we can address. It's a whole host of challenges that we need to look at. Clinical trial costs are vast for these conditions. And then if you get through the clinical trial costs, then the process to have them licensed, so the regulatory processes, the manufacture at commercial scale, and then reimbursement is also prohibitive for this process. And if we take simply ex vivo gene therapy for ultra-rare diseases, in the past 2 years, 6 gene therapy products have been dropped by commercial partners for non-medical reasons. So to achieve sustainable and affordable access to these life-changing gene therapies for patients with rare inherited disorders, we think evolution rather than revolution is needed. And we need to explore some alternative models to the conventional commercialization model. We're not aiming to be competitive in that respect, but I think that we need to have a choice of alternative models to get these therapies to patients. So this is kind of like my Michael Scott from The Office slide. We have a saying in the UK, I don't know if it transcends across the Atlantic, that there's more than one way to skin a cat. The pictures for that weren't particularly nice. So I Googled synonyms for that, and apparently there's more than one way to peel an orange. And I think that's the point, that we have these effective therapies and we need to explore these alternative ways of getting them to patients. For some of those therapies, the traditional commercialization model may work, but for other therapies, they may not. And we're seeing that there are lots of different groups involved trying to make this happen. So this is just a couple of examples of sort of patient-led therapies that have gone on to do great things. So you might recognize the little girl in the picture as Mila. So she was a little girl diagnosed with Batten's disease, which is a really devastating progressive neurological condition. And the team at Boston Children's, together with her family, were able to do an entirely personalized medicine for her, an antisense oligonucleotide therapy, which she received after FDA approval for an N-of-1 trial. And she was treated with that and had some benefit from that. And so the Mila Miracle Foundation supported the continued research and development of that therapy. And then also there's another one I'm familiar with called Cure SPG50. So SPG, again, is a really devastating neurological disease that affects mostly toddlers. It's a spastic paraplegia 50. And again, this was driven by the parents of a boy called Michael. They set up a foundation, Cure SPG50, crowdfunded for a gene therapy to be developed for this condition. And their son received this, and now this FDA have approved orphan drug designation for the therapy Malpida for the treatment of this particular condition. So this is another way that these therapies can get to patients. But in Europe, we set up an initiative which is turning into a foundation, Access to Gene Therapy for Rare Diseases, or Agora. And the initiative is a combination of partners who've been really instrumental in developing and delivering gene therapies for rare diseases across Europe over the past 20 years. And really our mission was to facilitate access to effective gene therapy, so things that have been proven in clinical trial for patients with ultra-rare disease in Europe. And so these are our partners in this venture. We have partners in Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, CMAT team, who I'm sure you're familiar with, are also partners of Rocket, France, Switzerland, and importantly, we have patient organizations. So we have IPOPI, which is the International Patient Organization for Patients with Primary Immune Deficiencies. So back in September last year, we had our first workshop, and really we just wanted to bring together people to try and understand what are the challenges here. But our aim was to facilitate the sustainable access of effective gene therapies. And we were really focusing on patients with ultra-rare diseases and inborn errors of immunity and inborn errors of metabolism, which is where we've seen some of these effective therapies, be most transformative. In the short term, we just wanted to understand if there's a way to make these therapies available. And in the long term, we were thinking, is there some kind of entity which we could develop or create, an independent, sustainable, not-for-profit entity, which could potentially look for marketing authorization for some of these projects, and then delivery and access to these therapies. So we explored various different stakeholder perspectives. Like I said, we had over 50 people come from Europe, mostly, and we were really interested in the developers, the patient perspective, the regulators, the funders, and also commercial partners. And I'm not sure if you'll be able to see very well, but there is, I'll just put a big arrow so you can see. So Kinnary was very kind and came over to talk about the commercial perspective of this over in London, which was extremely helpful. So as we've talked about, the cost of developing these products is vast, and often not commercially feasible for companies alone. So really, we wanted to look at whether there were any tangible things we could do to reduce the costs of these advanced therapies. And in the process, there's a lot of repetition, which is associated with high costs. So we think if we can reduce the repetition in these regulatory pathways, then we can also reduce the costs. So we're looking at developing a harmonized infrastructure and regulatory approach across nations, which means getting regulators to talk to each other, which we're in the process of doing. We're also interested in looking at data sharing as a way to reduce repetition and reduce costs, so we can de-risk and streamline safety assays and really show regulators that these approaches are safe, And so we're looking at developing a repository for data for that. One thing which is happening in Europe and maybe potentially in the US is looking at regulation of platform technology processes. So most of the gene therapies that we use for the conditions that I treat use the same kind of virus. They use the same kind of promoters to drive the gene that we're interested in. It's just the gene that's different. The manufacture process is the same. The development process is the same. So if we can get a regulatory approval for that platform, then that would be able to reduce the costs of development. And that's something that's going to be taken forward in Europe for metabolic diseases. And essentially what we've done is we've created this international network of expert centers where we could deliver some of these advanced therapies should they become available and licensed. So the idea is that the cells will travel, not the patient, and will be able to deliver these therapies across borders. So we see the future role of Agora as really coordinating, supporting, and aligning. We want to be a central body that can provide support mostly to academic medical centers or not-for-profit organizations for regulatory approval of advanced therapies and rare diseases at a multinational, European, and hopefully one day global level. We're focusing on this independent third-party repository for data sharing as one of our first actions. But we're also very interested in education, so educating regulatory agencies and other HTAs about the importance and value of these therapies. And we're also going to be looking at whether we can lobby for policy change, certainly in Europe in the first instance, and harmonizing these pan-European national activities, because, as I said, it's a topical issue and there's lots of groups looking to help in this process. So as I said in the beginning, it all comes back to patients. This is why we do this, and this is why we can't give up on some of these effective therapies that we've seen. This is Tegan, who's one of the first patients that I looked after. So she's a girl with ADA SCID. Her kidneys were very damaged initially by some of the conditions that she had associated with that. So she wasn't a candidate for bone marrow transplant. So she actually had gene therapy a long time ago when we used a different viral system to deliver the gene therapy, and that didn't work for her. So she went back to receiving weekly injections, infusions, lots of medications. And then a few years later, we developed a new way of delivering the gene, the lentiviral system that we use now. And her and her family were brave enough and essentially kind enough to give this new therapy a go, because she still didn't have a very good option for transplant. So again, they put their faith in our system, and she went through and had a very successful second procedure. And so she is now at university. She's got a pet. She's had her ears pierced, the things that were really important to her. And the picture on the right is myself and Jimwa, our nurse specialist, saying goodbye to her as she transitioned to adult care, which is a really amazing thing for patients who are born with some of these really devastating inherited conditions. So this is why we absolutely have to focus on making sure that we can get these really effective therapies to patients. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm really happy to take any questions or answer any comments that you may have.
Folks, we have a microphone in the center there. You can just get up, walk right over to that mic, and then look to the back of the room, face the camera so you can speak. Now look the other way. Look the other way. That's where she is.
Hi, hopefully you can see me. This is Bharat Patel. I work in the area of process development and manufacturing. So one of the points you mentioned that there is efforts in platformizing the regulatory strategy. I'm very glad to hear that, first of all, because there are a lot of technologies we use project to project or program to program. They're very similar. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that what are the efforts you guys are making to make it more of a regulatory platform strategy?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things related to repeating the cycles is, for example, like the replication competent lentivirus. And this is a test that is extremely expensive, that everybody is required to do several times during process development. And so if we have a bank or a repository of data that shows we've got X 15 years of experience of doing this for trial patients, for the validations that you have to do before you're licensed, then we think that that would hopefully act as a supportive body of work for regulatory agencies. So there's first steps that we can do with some of these initial, the data that we already have available. One thing that we want to look towards in the future, which will affect the manufacturing potentially, is looking at ways in which we can cut costs there. So not sort of blanket through reducing repetition, but actually looking at, what are the cell populations that we need to transduce? Is there something that we can do to further optimize the transduction process that will reduce our overall costs? And that's something that we hope will also become a collaborative effort, not just with the Agora Foundation, but in a wider context as well. So that's a little bit later down the line. The platform approvals is an interesting concept. So as I said, we all use the same backbone, the same manufacture processes for these conditions. And so I think the idea is that you would have a trial of, I'm just going to take some numbers, but let's say you have a trial of 9 patients with 3 different disorders of the same ilk. So inborn errors of immunity, inborn errors of metabolism. And you could have 3 patients for one disease treated on one trial, 3 patients with one disease, 3 patients with another disease, 3 patients with a third disease. But because you're using the same backbone and all the same kind of platform technology, that would count as essentially one trial that then you could put forward and get approval for those 3 different diseases. And that's something that is still obviously at an exploratory phase, but I know that discussions are underway for that in Europe. I hope that answers your question. You can ask me for further clarification.
No, thank you. I think the last portion, what you said about, I think historically companies can probably start building the data set to say, hey, the CMC package has been the exact same. What we have been changing is the transgene, and how much it relates to the safety data, that still remains to be seen. But I think somewhere to start, if the CMC portion can get trimmed down, that would be a significant impact. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what we hope.
Hi, Claire. Thank you so much for joining us. Next time we'll have to have you come in person. Two questions that I have. How do we bring this type of initiative to the US? What are your thoughts around that? And the second is, how are the health authorities around Europe at least collaborating to make this even feasible in the near future?
So, I mean, I know that there's a lot of initiatives in the US as well to drive this kind of agenda forward. And certainly we've been working and talking with some of them as well. And I've been invited over to give a talk at the PIDTC meeting in April in Cincinnati, where actually this is going to be like the main focus of one of the sessions. So talking about the Agora Foundation, Peter Marks from FDA talking about what can be done on the US side, and Don Cohn, who's one of your investigators and has been also involved in this area. So there is talk between all the different agencies, and I think that we're all reaching out to each other. So we are in the process of establishing ourselves as a legal foundation, and once we've done that, we're looking to partner with lots of different organizations, including some in the US, where we can, again, data sharing shouldn't be an issue across the different nations, and we hope that US centers will participate in that as well. We're still in kind of early stages of getting all the health authorities to talk to each other, but within the different nations and countries in Europe, this has been essentially welcomed as a way forward. The cost that we can potentially deliver therapies at an academic scale are significantly less than what might be required at a commercial level. And so, I think that's something that we're starting to talk about early. I mean, one of the things that we're also thinking about in the European context is price points for flat fees across countries, so that there isn't that discrepancy, and there isn't, the situation that we find ourselves in now, where some countries have access to these therapies and some countries don't. That's exactly what we don't want to happen. We want these therapies to be accessible to patients wherever they are.
It's this one, yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you for, I know you have 3 jobs that you do, right? Which is 1, treating patients in the hospital, pediatric patients, 2, participating in clinical studies and advancing science and collaborating with companies like us. And to do that plus this above it, it really shows the amazing passion you have, and we really appreciate you being part of this ecosystem and helping lead this way. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's not, I mean, it's not me. It's like everybody is so dedicated to this, and everybody is so passionate within our group. And, like I said, if we don't do something, I don't know what happened, but there isn't a choice not to do something. We have a responsibility to do something. So we're going to give it a go.
Hi, Claire. I have a question about, are there, and this is a very exciting and worthwhile enterprise, but I was curious about, are there any internal efforts or collaboratory efforts to help identify patients or work on genetic testing and access to kind of get patients connected to your group?
Yeah, I mean, we've already, like at the workshop day we had, we had patient group representation, not just from MyPoPy, but from the disease specific groups who've been specifically affected by this issue. So chronic granulomatous disease and Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome. And we've been contacted by, we've actually been approached by other patient groups, and we do intend to, widen out our partnership once we get established. In terms, I mean, you're absolutely right. For all these genetic diseases where we find an effective cure, we need to be looking at how we can pick up patients earlier, education, and potentially newborn screening in some contexts. And that is something that we recognize and will work towards. But at the moment, we're just trying to get our first couple of steps sorted out, which is getting established, setting up our registry, and talking with all the regulatory agencies and HTAs around Europe.
Claire, I've got a question that's come in online for you. Having done this for years now and outlining all of the challenges, what would you say is your biggest accomplishment, something you're most proud of to date?
Gosh, I mean, I think the fact that we still are seeing expansion in this field. So when I started, we treated, a couple of conditions, and now the number of conditions has rapidly expanded. And so I think that's not like that's like an accomplishment across the whole field. And when you see patients, when your clinic is full because you've treated so many patients, and the appointments are short because there's nothing really to say because they're doing so well, that feels like a big accomplishment.
That's an amazing answer. Thank you, Claire. Do we have any other questions in the room or online? With that, Claire, thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. You're welcome to stay on Zoom and watch the rest of the meeting if you'd like.
Thank you so much for inviting me again. And it was a real pleasure to speak, and I hope you have a good day.